You probably learned the basics of ancient mythology in school, but the original stories from Sumer hold secrets that rewrite everything you thought you knew. This is not just about gods and monsters. It is about the very foundations of our history and the mysterious origins of humanity itself. By the end of this journey, you will know 30 astonishing truths hidden for millennia. Why did the Sumerians describe their gods as coming from the stars? And what was the real purpose of the first epic story ever written? How much of our own world was shaped by these forgotten ideas? The very name Anunnaki holds a clue that changes everything. It does not translate to gods. Instead, it means princely offspring or those of royal blood. This single linguistic detail forces a dramatic reinterpretation of who these beings were. They were described not as omnipotent creators, but as a distinct lineage, a ruling class of immense power. This shifts their role from divine spirits shaping the cosmos to what seems more like a powerful family or a group of advanced overseers. Think of them less as mystical deities and more as the aristocracy of a forgotten world, beings with advanced knowledge who directed human society. This interpretation is hotly debated among scholars. Some insist the Anunnaki were always meant to be understood as gods in the traditional sense. Others argue the textual evidence points to something else entirely, something more tangible. If they were not gods, then what were they? The idea of them being visitors with technology so advanced it seemed like magic begins to feel less like science fiction and more like a plausible reading of the oldest stories we possess. This redefinition is the first secret, the first crack in the foundation of ancient mythology, revealing a story far more complex and earth-shattering than we were ever taught. This reinterpretation of the Anunnaki leads directly to one of their most consequential acts, a story so profound it echoes across thousands of years and multiple cultures. The secret is that the Great Flood, a cornerstone of biblical narrative, is not originally a Hebrew story. The first Noah was a Sumerian king named Ziusudra. Long before the ark rested on Mount Ararat, Ziusudra was instructed by the god Enki to build a massive vessel to survive an impending deluge. The gods themselves had voted to send a flood to destroy humanity, a decision Enki, who was sworn to secrecy, could not directly reveal. So in a moment of brilliant subterfuge, he did not speak to Ziusudra directly. Instead, he spoke to the reed walls of the king's house. He whispered his warning of the coming destruction into the very structure, telling the walls to build a great boat and gather the seed of all living things. Ziusudra, listening on the other side, heard everything. This is not a vague legend. It is recorded on broken clay tablet fragments like the Eridu Genesis, which date back over 4,000 years, predating the earliest biblical texts by more than a millennium. The details are strikingly familiar: a divine warning, a constructed boat, a catastrophic flood that wiped the earth clean, and the eventual rewarding of the survivor with immortality. The universality of this flood myth, found in cultures from the Middle East to the Americas, suggests a shared, foundational memory of a real cataclysmic event, perhaps a massive regional flood in the ancient Near East that was so traumatic its story was passed down for generations. But the Sumerian version adds a crucial, unsettling layer. In their telling, the flood was not a punishment for human sinfulness, but a calculated decision by the gods to solve a problem, an overpopulation of noisy humans that disturbed their rest. This shifts the moral framework entirely, presenting the gods not as moral arbiters but as practical, and at times callous beings. The survival of Ziusudra was not a reward for piety, but the result of one dissenting god, Enki, cleverly subverting the will of the divine council to preserve his creation. This ancient story forces us to wonder how many other foundational tales have roots that stretch back into the dusty plains of Sumer, waiting to be rediscovered. This quest for survival against divine will leads us to another monumental secret hidden within the world's first great epic: The story of Gilgamesh is often simplified as a classic hero's journey, but its true depths reveal a startlingly modern psychological portrait. Gilgamesh, the powerful king of Uruk, begins as a tyrant, a man so brutal that his own people pray for relief. The gods answer by creating Enkidu, a wild man from the wilderness, to be his mirror and challenge. The transformation of Enkidu is not just a physical change from beast to man. It is a profound metaphor for the birth of civilization itself, a painful process of losing instinctual innocence to gain knowledge and sorrow. When Enkidu is seduced by a temple priestess and introduced to bread, beer, and city life, he gains understanding but loses his unique connection to the natural world. The animals he once lived with now flee from him. This is the epic's first great secret, the tragic cost of progress. Civilization, it suggests, is built upon a fundamental loss, a separation from our wild origins that can never be undone. The bond between Gilgamesh and Enkidu becomes the heart of the story, a deep friendship that tempers the king's arrogance. But when the gods decree Enkidu's death as punishment for their shared hubris, Gilgamesh is plunged into a raw existential crisis. Watching his friend die, he does not just mourn a companion. He confronts his own inevitable fate for the first time. His subsequent, desperate quest for immortality is not the action of a noble hero, but the terrified reaction of a man who has truly understood mortality. He journeys to the ends of the earth, facing monstrous guardians and crossing the waters of death, all to find Utnapishtim, the flood survivor who possesses the secret of eternal life. This is the epic's second hidden theme, a struggle with the nature of existence that feels incredibly contemporary. Gilgamesh is asking the same questions we ask today. What is the point of our achievements if we are just going to die? How do we find meaning in a finite life? The conclusion of his quest delivers a final, devastating secret. Utnapishtim challenges Gilgamesh to stay awake for just 7 days. A simple test the exhausted king immediately fails, proving he cannot even conquer sleep, let alone death. As a final consolation, Utnapishtim tells him of a plant that can restore youth, a possible compromise. Gilgamesh retrieves it from the bottom of the sea, only to have it stolen by a serpent while he bathes. The serpent sheds its skin, a powerful symbol of renewed life, while Gilgamesh is left with nothing. He returns to Uruk empty-handed but not empty-minded. His journey ends not with a prize but with wisdom. He points out the mighty walls of his city to the boatman, recognizing that while individual human life is fleeting, the works of civilization, the things we build together, are our only true form of immortality. This ancient epic, carved into clay tablets, ultimately argues that meaning is found not in chasing eternal life, but in embracing our shared human project. The psychological depth of this realization, written over 4,000 years ago, forces us to reconsider just how advanced the Sumerian understanding of the human condition really was. Gilgamesh found his immortality in the walls of his city, but another Sumerian deity sought her power in the land of the dead. The story of the goddess Inanna's descent into the underworld holds a dual secret, one that explains the world around us and another that reveals a shocking act of betrayal. First, this myth is a profound allegory for the natural world. Inanna, the Queen of Heaven, is also the goddess of love, fertility, and the planet Venus. Her decision to descend into the dark, lifeless realm of her sister Ereshkigal mirrors the planet Venus disappearing from the evening sky, and more importantly, it symbolizes the annual death of vegetation during the scorching Mesopotamian summer. When she passes through the 7 gates of the underworld, she is stripped of her royal garments and symbols of power one by one, until she stands naked and powerless before her sister, who immediately kills her and hangs her corpse on a hook. The world above responds to her absence. All sexual activity and plant growth cease. The land becomes barren and silent. This is the first secret, the myth as a divine explanation for the seasonal cycle, a story written in the stars and the withering fields. But the myth does not end there. Through the clever intervention of a messenger, Inanna is revived, but the ancient laws of the underworld decree that no one may leave unless they find a substitute to take their place. As she returns to the world, accompanied by a horde of underworld demons, she searches for someone to sacrifice. She finds her lover, the shepherd god Dumuzid. He is not mourning her loss. Instead, he is seated upon her throne, dressed in royal robes, celebrating his own power. Enraged by this betrayal, Inanna fixes her eye upon him. The demon sees him, and despite his desperate attempts to flee, Dumuzid is dragged down to the underworld to take her place. This is the second, more disturbing secret. The changing seasons are born not from a noble sacrifice, but from a goddess vengeance against a disloyal lover. Yet the story shows a strange mercy. Dumuzid's compassionate sister, Inanna, volunteers to share his sentence, so it is decreed that Dumuzid will spend half the year in the underworld and his sister the other half. This is the origin of the seasonal cycle as we know it. The 6 months of growth when Dumuzid is free, and the 6 months of barren winter when he is imprisoned below. This ancient tale of power, jealousy, and a negotiated fate for the sake of the world feels far more human and far more complex than any simple story of a dying and rising god. It makes us question the very nature of the forces that govern our world, suggesting they are driven by motives we can recognize all too well. The story of Dumuzid and the seasons reveals a world governed by divine rules, but what were these rules actually made of? Another secret lies in a Sumerian concept called the Me, pronounced May. These were not simple commandments or laws. The Me were the fundamental components of civilization itself, the abstract blueprints for every aspect of a functioning society. Think of them as the divine source code for human culture. Enki, the god of wisdom and water, was the keeper of these powerful essences. He held the Me for kingship and truth, for the art of weaving and metalworking, for music and writing, and even for concepts like victory and strife. One myth describes the goddess Inanna visiting Enki, and through a clever series of toasts, convincing him to give her more than 100 of these Me. This was not a theft of physical objects, but a transfer of authority over the very principles that define a civilization. This idea forces us to reconsider the origins of human progress. The Sumerians seem to be saying that we did not invent kingship or carpentry through slow trial and error. Instead, these capacities were granted to us from a higher intelligence, a pre-existing template we were allowed to access. The Me for prostitution, given alongside those for law and priesthood, illustrates that this blueprint included every facet of society, sacred and profane, all seen as essential to the complex machinery of urban life. This was a divine gift with immense consequences. It provided the foundational structure for the world's first cities, but it also came with a built-in limitation. Humanity was given the tools to build civilization, but not the ultimate authority to alter its core design. The Me represent a secret history of culture, suggesting that our entire social order might be based on a set of instructions we are still, to this day, unconsciously following. Yet the very fabric of this civilization, built on the Me, had a single, almost forgotten source. Before the gods of sky and earth, before the rules of kingship or the art of writing, there was only the primordial sea. And that sea had a name and a consciousness. Her name was Nammu. She is perhaps the greatest secret of Sumerian mythology, the original creator who birthed the universe itself. In the oldest texts, it is not a male god who brings forth existence from nothing. It is Nammu, the endless, formless saltwater, who gave birth to An, the sky, and Kai, the earth. She is the mother of the chief gods, the grandmother of the mighty Enlil, and the great-grandmother of the clever Enki. Her word alone was enough to set creation into motion. She conceived the idea of humanity and then tasked her son Enki with the actual work of shaping them from clay. She was the ultimate matriarch, the singular source from which all power and life ultimately flowed. So why is she almost completely absent from the later, more popular myths? Why have you likely never heard her name? Her gradual erasure from prominence is a secret history in itself. As Sumerian society evolved, becoming more structured and patriarchal, its pantheon seemed to follow. The active, ruling gods like the sky god An and the air god Enlil rose to the forefront of worship, while the quiet, foundational power of the primordial mother faded into the background. She became a footnote, a distant memory of a time before power had a gender, before creation was an act of conflict. She was not defeated or dethroned. She was simply overshadowed, her role as the solitary origin point slowly replaced by stories of male gods battling for supremacy. This shift obscures a profound truth about the Sumerian worldview. Their universe did not begin with a clash of titans or a word spoken into the void. It began with a mother's silent, generative presence. The sea did not need to fight or command. It only needed to be, and from its being, everything else emerged. Recognizing Nammu forces us to confront a startling possibility. The oldest creation story we have points not to a father god, but to a mother goddess, a secret matriarchal origin for all of mythology that was slowly written out of the narrative, leaving only faint echoes in the clay for us to rediscover millennia later. But this divine blueprint, the ME, was not the ultimate source of power in the cosmos. That authority belonged to a single, physical object, a relic of such immense power that controlling it meant controlling reality itself. This was the Tablet of Destinies. It was not merely a list of fates. It was the active control panel for the universe, the mechanism that enforced the cosmic order and the divine laws. Whoever held the tablet could dictate the movements of the stars, the cycles of seasons, and the destinies of both gods and humanity. Its power was absolute. This ultimate authority was originally held by Enlil, the chief of the gods, making him the de facto ruler of the cosmos. But power of this magnitude is always a target. The stability of this divine order was shattered by a being named Anzu, a tremendous lion-headed eagle, a creature born from the primordial waters. Anzu was not a mindless monster. He was a servant tasked with guarding the sacred chamber where Enlil bathed. From this position, he witnessed the awesome power of the tablet firsthand, and he coveted it. In a moment of opportunity, as Enlil disrobed and placed the tablet aside, Anzu seized it. He did not just steal an artifact, he stole the very functioning of the universe. The moment the tablet left Enlil's possession, the cosmic machinery ground to a halt. The gods were thrown into chaos, their powers faded, the natural order ceased to function, and a profound paralysis fell over the divine assembly. They were suddenly powerless, their authority rendered meaningless without the tablet that gave it force. The recovery of the Tablet of Destinies became the single most important mission in the universe. One god after another tried and failed to defeat Anzu, who now wielded the tablet's power to reshape reality against them. The one who finally succeeded was Ninurta, the fierce god of war and Enlil's own son. His battle with Anzu was not just a physical contest, it was a cosmic struggle. With advice from the wise god Ninurta was told he could not win through brute force alone. He had to disrupt the tablet's connection. As the fight raged, Ninurta loosed his arrows not directly at Anzu, but around him, creating a whirlwind that broke the bird god's concentration. In that moment of distraction, Ninurta struck true, killing Anzu and reclaiming the Tablet of Destinies for the gods. The symbolism here is profound. The tablet represents the fundamental idea that cosmic order is not self-sustaining. It requires a central, authoritative source, a kind of divine technology that can be stolen, lost, or recovered. This suggests the Sumerians saw the universe not as a perfectly stable system, but as one that was actively managed and terrifyingly vulnerable. The fate of everything from the gods in heaven to the smallest human on earth depended on the security of a single physical object. It makes you wonder if this ancient story is a metaphor for something even grander, a secret fear that the laws of nature themselves are not immutable, but are held in place by a fragile and potentially stealable key. The absolute power of the Tablet of Destinies ensured a cosmic order, but that order was built upon a single, unified human language. A time existed when all of humanity spoke with one voice, allowing for cooperation on a scale we can barely imagine. This universal understanding was the bedrock of a golden age of human endeavor, a period of unprecedented collaboration that ultimately threatened the gods themselves. The secret is that this golden age did not end by accident. It was deliberately sabotaged by the very deity who had helped create humanity, the god Enki. In a story that eerily foreshadows the biblical Tower of Babel, the Sumerian texts describe a growing concern among the divine council. Humanity, with its shared language and singular purpose, was becoming too powerful, too unified. Their collective projects were so immense and their coordination so perfect that they began to rival the works of the gods. It was not a tower reaching for heaven that sparked their fear, but the sheer, unstoppable momentum of a united species. Enlil, the chief god, saw this as a direct challenge to divine authority and proposed a radical solution. The unity of mankind had to be broken. The task fell to Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water, who held a deep, complicated affection for the humans he had helped fashion from clay. The myths are ambiguous about his motives. Was he acting out of jealousy, or was this an act of mischievous defiance against Enlil's harsh decree? Perhaps it was even a strange form of mercy, knowing that a divided humanity would be less of a threat and therefore less likely to be utterly destroyed. Whatever the reason, Enki did not unleash a plague or a flood. He chose a far more subtle and profoundly effective weapon. He introduced confusion into the very medium of human thought, speech itself. In one moment, a single word carried a shared meaning for every person on earth. In the next, that same sound meant different things to different groups. The universal language shattered into countless fragments. Where there was once clarity, now there was babble. Cooperation on a grand scale became impossible almost overnight. Projects that required the synchronized labor of thousands were abandoned as people could no longer understand each other's instructions or intentions. The golden age of unified human endeavor collapsed not with a bang but with a cacophony of competing dialects. This divine intervention did more than just halt construction. It fundamentally altered the human psyche. It created the concept of the other, separating people into tribes defined by their unique speech. This was the birth of the world as we know it, a world of diverse cultures and languages, but also a world of perpetual misunderstanding and conflict. The parallel to the later Tower of Babel story is undeniable, yet the Sumerian version adds a crucial layer of complexity. Here, the god who confounds language is not a singular, wrathful deity, but a clever, perhaps even reluctant, agent of a collective divine fear. Enki's sabotage forces us to question whether the beautiful diversity of human language was a gift of cultural richness or a punishment designed to keep us forever divided. A permanent check on our potential to achieve together what was once reserved for the gods alone. This division of language created a world of separate tribes, but it also birthed a new kind of fear, the terror of invisible predators that thrived in the shadows of misunderstanding. The Sumerians lived in constant dread of two distinct classes of supernatural beings, entities so terrifying they feel eerily familiar to our modern myths. First were the Galu demons. These were not vague spirits of misfortune. They were the shock troops of the underworld, fierce and relentless hunters dispatched from the realm of the goddess Ereshkigal. Imagine a creature forged from pure malevolence, a being with the body of a man but the head of a snarling lion or a raging bull, sometimes depicted with wings of a bird of prey. Their name itself is thought to mean the Caesars, and that is precisely what they did. They did not merely haunt or frighten. They actively hunted those who had committed sins or broken taboos, dragging their screaming victims down into the dark pit of Ker, the Sumerian underworld, a place of dust and silence from which there was no return. They were the divine enforcers of cosmic law, a personification of the inescapable consequences for moral transgression. But an even more personal and insidious threat lurked in the forgotten corners of the world. These were the Edimu. Unlike the divinely sanctioned Galu, the Edimu were born from human tragedy. They were the restless spirits of the dead who had not received a proper burial, or who had died with deep, unresolved sorrow, a burning sense of injustice or violent, untimely end. Denied the peace of the afterlife, these spirits were condemned to wander the earth, trapped between worlds, and they were not benign. A profound, cold hunger defined their existence. They were believed to stalk the living, not for flesh, but for the very essence of life. They would attach themselves to a person, slowly draining their vitality, their luck, and their emotional strength, leaving behind a shell of a human plagued by sickness, nightmares, and a slow, inexplicable decline into despair. Does this sound hauntingly familiar? The description of the Edimu is one of the earliest known precursors to the vampire legends that would captivate cultures millennia later. They were the original energy vampires, psychic parasites feeding on the life force of the living because they had been denied their own peaceful rest. This belief reveals a profound and deeply humane understanding of death in Sumerian culture. It was not enough to simply die. One had to die correctly with the proper rites and a sense of closure, or risk becoming a monstrous shadow, a danger to the very community you once belonged to. The Galu and the Edimu represent two sides of the same terrifying coin. One was a top-down punishment from the gods for moral failings, while the other was a bottom-up curse born from social neglect and personal tragedy. Together, they painted a world where the boundary between life and death was perilously thin, and where every action and every inaction could summon a horror from the darkness. The same myths that spoke of gods and demons also held a secret map of the heavens. A deep astronomical knowledge was woven directly into the fabric of their stories, a code waiting to be cracked millennia later. Consider the Anunnaki, those princely offspring who directed human destiny. Their traditional number is often given as 7. This is not a random figure. It corresponds precisely to the 7 celestial bodies the Sumerians could observe moving against the backdrop of the fixed stars, the 7 wanderers that would later be known in our solar system. These were the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The Anunnaki were not just powerful beings, they were personifications of these dominant forces in the night sky, their movements and interactions dictating the fates of those below. This connection transforms their mythology from simple folklore into a complex cosmological record. The story of Inanna's descent into the underworld reveals another layer of this celestial code. Her journey was not just an allegory for the seasons, it perfectly mirrors the astronomical behavior of the planet Venus, which she embodied. Venus is a morning star for a period, then it disappears from view as it passes behind the sun, a period the ancients saw as its death and descent into the underworld. After a time, it reappears in the evening sky, reborn, but the Sumerians recorded something even more precise. They noted that just before Venus disappears, it appears to slow down, stop, and move backwards for a short period. This is the retrograde motion of Venus, an advanced astronomical observation. In the myth, as Inanna approaches the final gate of the underworld, she is described as slowing, stumbling, and losing her power, a direct narrative parallel to the planet's observed retrograde dance. This is not a coincidence, it is evidence of meticulous, long-term sky watching. The most staggering secret, however, may be hidden within their creation epic, the Enuma Elish. This grand poem describes the slow, gradual shifting of the celestial sphere, a phenomenon known as the precession of the equinoxes. This is a wobble in the Earth's axis that causes the position of the stars to drift by about 1 degree every 72 years, completing a full cycle every 26,000 years. It is an almost imperceptibly slow motion, undetectable without precise instruments and records maintained over centuries or even millennia. Yet, some researchers argue the numerical patterns and time cycles described in the Enuma Elish align with this grand cosmic clock. If true, this suggests the Sumerians possessed a sophisticated understanding of cosmic time scales that modern science did not confirm until the last few centuries. How could a civilization from the dawn of history have known this? Did they inherit this knowledge from a far older, lost culture? Or were their observations so patient and exact that they mapped the slow dance of the heavens over generations? The myths were not just stories, they were a multi-layered scientific and spiritual text written in the language of the stars themselves. Their own name for themselves holds a secret identity. They did not call their land Sumer, a name given by later peoples. They were the Sag-Giggar, the black-headed people. This was far more than a simple physical description of their dark hair. It was a powerful declaration of who they were, a cultural and ethnic banner that separated them from everyone else in the ancient world. In a landscape dominated by Semitic tribes like the Akkadians and Amorites, this term defined the Sumerians as a distinct people, the founders of civilization itself. To be one of the black-headed people was to be part of the original, the advanced, the chosen. Their entire worldview was built upon this foundational idea of their own uniqueness. Their language, which is a linguistic isolate unrelated to any of its neighbors, reinforced this separation. Their myths told them they were fashioned by the gods for a special purpose, to serve the divine and maintain the order of the world. This sense of cultural superiority was woven into the fabric of their society. They saw their city-states, their ziggurats, their written laws, and their irrigation canals as proof of their divine mandate. The peoples beyond their borders, those who did not share their black hair or their complex tongue, were often viewed as outsiders, less civilized and less favored by the gods. This self-perception was a double-edged sword. It fueled their incredible innovations and gave them a powerful, unified identity, but it also created a society that was often insular and wary of foreign influence. This deep-seated belief in their own exceptionalism raises a profound question. How much of human history has been shaped by this very same idea, the concept of a people set apart, chosen for a grander destiny? The legacy of the black-headed people is not just in their inventions, but in this powerful and often dangerous notion of a unique identity that would echo through empires for millennia to come. This sense of a chosen people required a governing hand, a singular authority to mediate between the divine and the mortal realms. We find this secret political theology etched into one of the oldest creation stories ever discovered, the Eridu Genesis. While it shares the familiar theme of humans being fashioned from clay by the gods to serve them, it introduces a revolutionary concept that would shape empires for centuries to come. The text explicitly states that after humanity was created, kingship itself was lowered from heaven. This was not a human invention born of ambition or consensus. It was a divine institution, a tool handed down by the gods to bring order to the chaotic masses of humankind. The first city, Eridu, was given its first king, and with him the sacred model for all rulers to follow. This was the birth of the idea of the divine right of kings, a secret pact between heaven and earth established not in medieval Europe, but in the mud-brick cities of ancient Sumer. The king was not merely a political leader, he was a necessary intermediary, the shepherd of the black-headed people. His primary duty was to oversee the labor and offerings that sustained the gods, ensuring the cosmic balance remained intact. He was the funnel through which divine will flowed to humanity and human devotion flowed back to the gods. This theological framework gave the king absolute authority, but it came with an immense and terrifying responsibility. If he failed in his duties, if the temples fell into disrepair or the gods were displeased with their offerings, the entire society risked divine abandonment, which meant famine, invasion, and collapse. The Eridu Genesis presents kingship not as a privilege but as a burden, a sacred office that separated a chosen individual from the rest of humanity and placed him directly in the service of cosmic forces. This foundational myth solved a very practical problem. How do you convince thousands of people to obey one man? The answer was to make him more than a man. By weaving the authority of the ruler directly into the story of human creation, the Sumerians created a powerful tool for social cohesion. It was a secret so effective that every subsequent civilization in the region, from the Akkadians to the Babylonians, would adopt and adapt this very same idea, each claiming their ruler was the true inheritor of that heavenly mandate. The divine authority of kings was absolute, but even a king could not command the skies. That power belonged to a deity whose voice was the thunder and whose gift was a double-edged sword. Ishtar, also known as Adad, was the master of storms, a god whose presence was felt in every drop of life-giving rain and in every wall of destructive floodwater. While gods like Enlil ruled from on high, Ishtar was the raw, untamed force of the atmosphere itself, the farmer's most fervent hope and his most profound terror. His dual nature was the secret to his power, and the reason he never rose to the supreme prominence of a Zeus or a Thor in later myths. In the arid plains of Mesopotamia, rain was not a common inconvenience. It was the difference between a bountiful harvest and mass starvation. When Ishtar was benevolent, he opened the locks of heaven, releasing the gentle rains that nourished the barley fields and filled the irrigation canals. He was celebrated as a divine bringer of abundance, the partner of the sun god Utu in sustaining all life. His sacred animal was the bull, a symbol of potent, generative strength, and his roar was the thunder that announced the coming of the fertile seasons. Yet this same life-giving power could, in an instant, transform into apocalyptic fury. When enraged, Ishtar did not merely bring a storm, he wielded the deluge itself. The same rains that fed the crops could swell the Tigris and Euphrates rivers into uncontrollable torrents, wiping away entire villages and drowning the livestock in the fields. His wrath was depicted as a monstrous, roaring bull charging across the land, trampling everything in its path. This inherent contradiction, this inability to be purely good or reliably destructive, kept him in a powerful but secondary role within the pantheon. He was a necessary force, but not a governing one. You could not build a stable cosmic order upon a god who was as likely to destroy your city as to save it. His power was reactive, often unleashed at the command of higher gods like Enlil to punish wayward humans or rebellious deities. This made him an instrument of divine will, a spectacularly powerful enforcer, but never the one who made the final decisions. He was the storm itself, magnificent and terrifying, but ultimately subject to the same cosmic authorities that ruled over kings and commoners alike. His legacy is a reminder that the most vital forces in our world are often the most unpredictable, and that the gods who hold the power of life itself inevitably hold the power of death as well. The raw power of a storm god like Ishtar was a force to be appeased, but the inner world of the gods required an even more specialized form of service. Deep within the temple courtyards, a secret ritual unfolded, one performed by a unique class of priests known as the Gala. These were not typical holy men offering sacrifices. Their sacred duty was to embody sorrow itself. When a god or goddess was believed to be in distress, particularly Inanna in her grief for the lost Dumuzid, the Gala priests would perform elaborate lamentations. They would weep, wail, and sing mournful songs, not in the standard Sumerian language, but in a special, refined dialect known as Emezul. This was not a secret code, but rather a softer, more emotive form of speech, often described as the women's language or the fine tongue. Its use by the Gala was a deliberate act of channeling a specific, feminine emotional intensity. This leads to one of the most complex and debated secrets of their role. The Gala priests frequently took on characteristics associated with the opposite gender to fully inhabit their sacred function. Historical texts and hymns describe them wearing women's clothing, adopting feminine mannerisms, and even using female grammatical forms in their speech. Some scholars believe many of these priests were eunuchs, while others argue they represented a form of ritual gender fluidity, a temporary transformation that allowed them to bridge the human and divine realms by becoming living vessels for a goddess's grief. Their purpose was profound. By physically and vocally becoming the weeping Inanna, they performed a cosmic empathy. They did not just sing about the goddess's pain, they manifested it on earth, creating a sympathetic resonance that was believed to actually soothe the deity and restore balance to the world. This was magic of the most intimate kind, a spiritual technology that used human emotion as its primary tool. The existence of the Gala reveals a society with a far more nuanced understanding of gender and sacred performance than we might assume. In a world ruled by divine kings and fierce gods, there was a designated, honored space for those who mastered the art of sorrow, proving that to the Sumerians, the tears that watered the earth were just as vital as the rain from the heavens. Even the chief of the gods was not above the law. Enlil, the king of the pantheon, once faced a punishment so severe it redefined the very structure of the underworld, all because of a single, forbidden act of desire. The myth begins with a young and beautiful goddess Ninlil bathing in a sacred canal. Enlil, consumed by his passion, seduces her there, an act the other gods deem a grave transgression. For this sin, the divine assembly condemns Enlil to exile in the underworld, the bleak and silent land of the dead from which no one is supposed to return. This is a staggering concept, the supreme ruler cast out by his own peers, but the story does not end with his banishment. Ninlil, now carrying Enlil's child, makes a fateful decision. She chooses to follow him into the darkness. Her journey is not one of blind loyalty, but a determined quest to secure a destiny for her unborn son. She finds Enlil at the gate of the underworld, and what follows is a series of cunning deceptions. Disguising himself 3 times as different guardians of the underworld, Enlil approaches Ninlil. Each time he conceives another child with her. This strange and ritualistic sequence is the myth's hidden engine. The first son, conceived before the exile, is the moon god Nanna, destined for the heavens. But the 3 children conceived within the underworld itself, Nergal, Ninnazu, and Enbelulu, are each fated to become powerful deities of the netherworld. Nergal would grow to be the god of war and pestilence, a king of the dead alongside Ereshkigal. This myth is a profound origin story, explaining how the bleak realm of the dead gained its own divine aristocracy. It was not born empty, but was populated by the offspring of the chief god himself, a secret dynasty established through an act of transgression and a mother's relentless pursuit. The story weaves together themes of sin and redemption, fertility and fate. Enlil's sin brings life in the form of his children into the place of death. Ninlil's devotion transforms a punishment into a purpose, ensuring that even in exile, the line of the high god would rule. It presents a cosmos where order emerges from chaos, where even the gravest mistakes of the gods can lay the foundation for the complex structures that govern the world. Even the most powerful king could be brought low by a simple biological failure. Atana, the ancient ruler of the city of Kish, had everything a monarch could desire except for the one thing that would secure his legacy, a son. His desperate search for an heir led him to become the protagonist of one of humanity's oldest recorded flight myths. The story begins with Atana repeatedly pleading with the gods for a child. They direct him to a mountain where a great eagle lies trapped in a pit, a victim of its own broken oath. This eagle had made a pact with a serpent, only to later devour the serpent's young. In revenge, the serpent had crippled the eagle and left it to die. following divine instruction, Inanna rescues the magnificent bird, nursing it back to health. In gratitude, the eagle agrees to carry the king on its back in a quest for the elusive plant of birth, the only thing that could grant him a child. Their destination was not a distant land, but the heavens themselves. The text describes a terrifying ascent. The earth shrinks below them, first becoming like a mere hill, then a haystack, and finally vanishing entirely into the vast sea that surrounds the world. At this dizzying height, Inanna's courage fails him. Overwhelmed by vertigo, he cries out in terror, and the great eagle is forced to descend, their first mission a failure. This story is far more than a simple fable. It is a detailed, visceral account of a vertical journey, a narrative that captures the very human fear of leaving the safety of the ground. The description of the world receding in stages is not poetic fantasy, but a logical, almost clinical observation of what such an ascent might actually look like. This leads directly to the next, even more startling secret. The Sumerians had a specific word for the vehicles or objects used by their gods to travel the skies. They called them shems. This term is most commonly translated as name, but in a multitude of contexts, it is clear it means something far more tangible. It is the word used for the vehicles that carry the gods, and it forms the root of the name for the sun god, Utu, whose shem was the brilliant disk that crossed the sky each day. In the context of the Inanna myth, the eagle itself is interpreted by some researchers as a metaphorical shem, a living vehicle for celestial travel. The controversial theory suggests that these shems were not mythical chariots, but described advanced technological craft, perhaps even rockets or some form of propulsion system. Proponents of this viewpoint to cylinder seals and carvings that show what appear to be deities seated within conical, chamber-like objects, sometimes with flames or plumes erupting from their bases. They argue that the story of Inanna is not a fantasy about a man on a bird, but a garbled, symbolic record of an actual attempt to use this divine technology, a primitive and ultimately failed mission to breach the atmosphere. The eagle, in this reading, becomes a symbol for a complex machine, and Inanna's panic is the understandable terror of a human being subjected to forces and vistas for which he was utterly unprepared. Of course, mainstream scholarship dismisses this as a modern imposition on ancient symbolism, insisting the shems were purely religious icons representing divine authority and mobility, not physical spacecraft. Yet the precision of the language and the vivid, technical nature of the flight description in the Inanna myth forces a difficult question. Were the Sumerians simply using the most advanced vocabulary they had, the language of boats and chariots, to describe the inexplicable movements of their gods? Or were they, in their own way, documenting a reality they could not fully comprehend, leaving behind a secret history of flight encoded in the only terms they possessed? The line between a god's chariot and a rocket ship becomes dangerously thin when you realize both are simply vehicles designed to conquer a realm beyond our own. Inanna's failed flight was a personal tragedy, but the gods could unleash a far more comprehensive destruction upon an entire civilization. The Curse of Agade stands as one of history's most chilling texts, a poetic account of how the magnificent city of Agade, the capital of the world's first true empire under King Naram Sin, was systematically erased from the earth. Its secret is not just the story of a city's fall, but a theological bombshell, the belief that divine favor was not a permanent grant but a conditional loan that could be revoked without warning. The text describes a golden age where Agade seemed untouchable, its storehouses overflowing, its docks bustling, and its authority stretching to the very horizons. But its king, Naram Sin, grew too proud. In a catastrophic act of hubris, he ordered his troops to loot the sacred temple of Enlil in the holy city of Nippur. This was not a simple raid, it was a direct assault on the cosmic order itself. The myth describes a desperate and angry Naram Sin, who, after receiving an unfavorable omen from the gods, actually besieged the temple for 7 years, trying to force a positive divine response. This defiance shattered the sacred contract between the ruler and the divine. In response, the great gods, led by Enlil, withdrew their protective spirit from Agade. This divine abandonment was not a metaphor. It was seen as a tangible, physical withdrawal of a force that sustained the city's very existence. The consequences were immediate and horrifying. The text describes how the gods then summoned the Gutians, a barbarian people from the eastern mountains, to be the instrument of their wrath. But the destruction was not merely military. A psychological and spiritual blight fell upon the city. The social bonds that held the community together dissolved. The text paints a haunting picture of mothers no longer caring for their children, of lovers turning away from each other, of priests losing their knowledge of the sacred rites. The city's gates, walls, and canals were said to crumble into dust as if they had never been built. Agade was not just conquered, it was unmade, its memory cursed so thoroughly that to this day, archaeologists cannot pinpoint its exact location. The lesson was stark and intended for all future rulers. No human achievement, no matter how grand, was secure without the consent of the gods. Civilization was a fragile shield against chaos, and the moment a king forgot his role as a humble servant of the divine, that shield could be shattered in an instant. This was the ultimate secret fear at the heart of Sumerian power, the understanding that their entire world was built on a foundation that could be withdrawn with a single, silent decision from heaven. Even minor gods held profound secrets in the Sumerian world. While the great deities like Enlil and Inanna commanded cosmic forces, a lesser-known figure named Abu reveals how they saw the divine in every leaf and stalk. Abu was the god of vegetation and plant life, a seemingly humble domain, yet his origin story is anything but ordinary. He was not born in a grand celestial event, but from a simple scratch on the face of the god Enki. This tiny, almost mundane injury became the source of all green and growing things. The myth tells us that when Enki was unwell, the mother goddess Ninhursag placed him in her vulva to be healed. As he passed through, a part of him, perhaps a drop of blood or a fleck of skin from the scratch, touched the earth and gave birth to Abu. This is the secret link, the intimate connection between the divine body and the natural world. The Sumerians were not simply telling a fanciful tale. They were encoding a fundamental truth about their reality. Life did not spring from nothing, but from the very substance of the gods. A scratch, a seemingly insignificant event, could generate an entire domain of existence. Abu's role was to oversee this domain. He was the divine force within the barley that made the bread, the spirit in the reeds that built the houses, and the essence in the date palms that provided shade and sweetness. His existence solved a crucial problem in their worldview. How could a vast and complex world be managed by a handful of major gods? The answer lay in a divine bureaucracy, a pantheon where every single aspect of life, no matter how small, had a specific deity in charge. Abu was one of many such figures. There was a god for the pickaxe, another for the art of brickmaking, and even a deity specifically for the noise of a crowd. These minor gods filled the crucial niches, ensuring that every component of civilization and nature had divine oversight and could function in harmony. They were the specialized workers in the cosmic machine, each one a secret key that kept the entire system running. Without Abu, the plants might forget how to grow. Without the god of the pickaxe, the canals might never be dug. This intricate system reflects a universe where nothing was left to chance, where every blade of grass was touched by a spark of the divine. It makes you wonder if we have lost that sense of sacred connection to the ordinary, the understanding that even the smallest things around us are part of a vast, living, and intelligent design. The lion-headed eagle Anzu was far more than a fantastical beast. It was a living embodiment of the atmosphere's raw, untamed power. Its body, a fusion of the king of beasts and the master of the sky, represented the roaring thundercloud itself, a colossal form with the lion's mighty roar echoing as thunder and the eagle's vast wings casting the shadow of the storm. This creature was the power of the southern wind given form, a chaotic and unpredictable force that existed outside the structured order of the divine council. As a guardian, Anzu was entrusted with the most sacred of spaces, the very chamber where Enlil performed his purifying rites. His presence there was a testament to his immense power, a force potent enough to protect the heart of divine authority. Yet this proximity to ultimate power bred a catastrophic ambition. In witnessing the Tablet of Destinies, Anzu did not see a sacred object to be protected. He saw the very mechanism of control, and he desired it for himself. His theft was not merely a crime, it was an act of cosmic rebellion, the chaotic storm attempting to seize the controls of the universe. This profound symbolism, the guardian who becomes the usurper, echoes through later mythologies. The majestic griffin, another lion-bird hybrid, carries the legacy of Anzu as a guardian of priceless treasures and sacred knowledge. Even the phoenix, reborn from its own ashes, shares a thread of this ancient symbolism, representing a powerful, cyclical force that transcends destruction. But where the phoenix is a symbol of renewal, Anzu remains a symbol of pure, disruptive challenge, a reminder that the forces which guard order can, in a moment, become the very forces that seek to shatter it. That profound fear of invisible predators required a powerful defense. The Sumerians developed an entire system of spiritual combat, meticulously recorded in a collection of texts known as the Udug Hull, which translates to the evil demon. This was not a single book of prayers, but a comprehensive manual for demonic warfare, a secret arsenal of incantations and rituals used by priests to protect people from supernatural harm. These texts reveal a world where humanity was caught in a constant, unseen battle, where malevolent forces could strike at any moment, and only specialized knowledge could turn them back. The priests who performed these exorcisms were not just holy men, they were the frontline soldiers in this spiritual war. Their weapons were words, gestures, and sacred materials. The Udug Hull texts provided them with precise, step-by-step instructions for identifying the demon, confronting it with authority, and banishing it back to the dark realms from which it came. The incantations were not gentle requests, they were powerful commands spoken in the name of the great gods. A priest might invoke Enki's wisdom to outsmart a cunning spirit or call upon the fiery power of Nergal to terrify a demon of disease. The rituals were equally specific. They involved the use of pure water for cleansing, specially prepared figurines made of clay or dough to represent the demon, and the burning of aromatic woods like cedar to purify the air. The priest would often perform a symbolic act like breaking the figurine or throwing it into a river to enact the destruction or banishment of the evil entity. This detailed methodology shows us that the Sumerians saw the cosmos as a place of balance, where for every threat there was a countermeasure. Sickness was not just a biological event, it was the presence of an invading spirit. Bad luck was not random chance, it was the lingering effect of an Edemu's touch. The Udug Hull provided the tools to reset that balance, to cleanse the individual and the community. This belief in a universe teeming with hostile spirits might seem primitive, but it sprang from a very logical observation. Life was fragile and filled with suffering they could not otherwise explain. The Udug Hull gave them a framework to understand that suffering, and more importantly, the power to fight back. It was their secret science of the invisible world, a testament to their enduring belief that humanity was not meant to be a passive victim of cosmic forces, but an active participant in its own defense. But this cosmic defense system depended on a single, life-giving source. While other gods wielded thunderbolts or controlled the stars, the goddess Ninhursag embodied the earth itself, not as mere soil, but as a living, breathing mother. Her most profound secret is found in her title, the Mother of All Children. This was not an empty honorific. It defined her as the universal progenitor, the nurturing force who birthed and sustained every living being, from the highest god in the pantheon to the smallest insect crawling in the mud. She was the divine womb from which all existence emerged, making her role far more fundamental than that of a queen or a ruler. She was the source. This intimate connection is stunningly revealed in a myth where she acts as both creator and healer. The god Enki, her counterpart, had eaten forbidden plants from her garden, and in her fury, Ninhursag placed a curse upon him, causing 8 different parts of his body to fall deathly ill. As he lay dying, the other gods were helpless. Only the mother of all children could reverse her own judgment. Her anger subsided, and she sat beside the ailing Enki. What she did next was an act of profound creative healing. For each of his afflicted body parts, she did not simply apply a poultice or say a prayer. She gave birth to a new deity. To heal his tooth, she created the goddess of dentistry, Dazimua. For his rib, she birthed the healing goddess Ninti. One by one, she brought forth 8 new gods and goddesses, each one curing a specific ailment and taking their place in the divine order. This is not just a story about curing a sick god. It is a symbolic blueprint for the entire natural world. Every part of the body, every illness, and by extension, every function in the living world was believed to have its own divine caretaker, a specialized child born directly from the mother goddess to maintain the health of the whole. The most famous of these healers is Ninti, whose name means both the Lady of the Rib and the Lady of Life. This clever wordplay connects the act of healing a rib with the very essence of life, a concept that would resonate for millennia. Ninhursag's actions reveal a universe where creation and healing are the same process, where life is constantly renewed through the compassionate, generative power of the earth itself. She was the ultimate mother, not because she gave birth once, but because she never stopped giving life, using her own divine essence to mend the very fabric of existence whenever it was torn. These sacred temples were also the world's first corporate headquarters. Behind the towering ziggurats and solemn rituals lay a hidden economic empire of staggering scale. The temple of the goddess Inanna in Uruk, for instance, did not merely receive offerings. It directly controlled vast tracts of agricultural land, managed herds of livestock numbering in the tens of thousands, and employed a workforce of artisans, weavers, brewers, and accountants. This was not a side business. It was the primary engine of the Sumerian economy, a system where faith and finance were inseparably fused. The temple complex functioned as a centralized bank, a warehouse, and a distribution center all in one. It collected surplus grain as a form of tax, stored it in massive silos, and then redistributed it to feed the laborers who built the city's walls and canals. It controlled the production of wool and textiles, turning them into valuable trade goods that were exchanged for precious metals, timber, and stone from distant lands. The priests were not just spiritual leaders, they were the chief executive officers of this divine corporation, overseeing a complex bureaucracy that used the world's earliest writing to track every bushel of barley, every sheep, and every day of labor. How did they maintain this immense temporal power? The myths provided the ultimate justification. Stories of the gods needing to be fed, clothed, and housed in splendor were not merely allegorical. They were the divine mandate for the temple's economic activities. When a myth stated that the god Enlil required a grand temple, it authorized the priesthood to mobilize the entire population and its resources to build it. The belief that the gods owned the land and humanity were merely their servants meant that the temple, as the god's earthly estate, held ultimate control over property and production. This system created a self-perpetuating cycle. The temple's economic success was presented as proof of divine favor, which in turn reinforced its authority to demand more resources and labor. The grandeur of the ziggurat was not just a symbol of faith. It was a brilliant piece of corporate branding, a towering monument that visually demonstrated the institution's unshakable power and wealth, a power so complete that it shaped the very purpose of the first stories ever written down. The gods themselves wept for the city they had condemned. One of the most profound and overlooked secrets of Sumerian belief is found in a heartbreaking poem known as the Lament for the Destruction of Ur. This is not a victory song or a mere historical record. It is a divine elegy, a text where the great gods are portrayed not as detached executioners, but as grieving parents watching their child die. The poem describes the cataclysm as Enlil's divine word, a storm that cannot be called back, yet it lingers on the aftermath. The goddess Ningal, the city's divine mother, pleads with the other deities to spare her home, listing all the sacred rites and offerings Ur has faithfully performed for centuries. Her pleas fall on deaf ears, the decree is fixed and the destruction arrives, but then something astonishing happens. As the city burns and its people are led away into captivity, the gods who ordered the punishment are described as weeping in the streets. They mourn the silenced hymns, the abandoned temples, the empty courtyards. They cry for the very destruction they themselves set into motion. This reveals a theological secret of immense depth. The Sumerian gods were not omnipotent tyrants bound by cold logic. They were complex beings trapped by their own cosmic laws, capable of issuing a necessary judgment and then being shattered by its human cost. The divine tears represent a profound regret, a cosmic sorrow that the order they uphold sometimes demands a terrible price. It suggests that the forces governing the universe are not indifferent. They feel the pain of the world they rule, and in their own way they suffer with it. This transforms the entire relationship between humanity and the divine. We are not just their servants, but also the objects of their complicated and at times heartbreaking love. The gods needed our worship to sustain them, and in destroying a city, they were also destroying a part of their own sustenance and joy. The lament forces us to ask a difficult question. If the gods themselves grieve for the consequences of their own justice, where does that leave our understanding of fate, suffering, and the often painful machinery of the cosmos? A serpent with a human head coils through the underworld, not as a monster but as a divine physician. This is Ningish-Sidda, a lord of the earthly realm whose name means Lord of the Good Tree. His unique form, a fusion of human intellect and serpentine power, embodies a profound secret about the nature of life and death. The serpent, with its ability to shed its skin and emerge renewed, was the ultimate symbol of healing and regeneration for the Sumerians. Ningish-Sidda was not a god of terror, but a guardian of these transformative powers, a being who understood the cyclical journey between the world above and the world below. His legacy may be hidden in plain sight. The symbol most associated with him, a single serpent coiled around a staff, looks remarkably familiar. Centuries later, this very image would be adopted by the Greeks and become the caduceus, the universal emblem of medicine and healing we recognize today. The roots of this symbol do not lie in classical Greece, but in the fertile mud of Sumer, with a god who mastered the art of renewal. His power, however, was anchored to a specific mythical location, the very boundary between our world and the next. At the gateway to the underworld stood the Ziusudra tree, the physical manifestation of Ningish-Sidda's domain. This was no ordinary plant. It was a living sentinel, marking the final, irrevocable border between the land of the living and the silent realm of the dead. To pass this tree was to accept one's fate, to cross into an existence of dust and shadows from which no mortal could return. The tree represented a point of no return, but also a point of profound knowledge. It stood as the ultimate test and the final barrier. This imagery, a potent tree at the center of a cosmic boundary, guarded by a serpentine deity, cannot help but echo another, much later story. The parallels to the biblical Garden of Eden are startling. In both traditions, a sacred tree holds immense significance at a liminal space. In both, a serpent is intimately connected to this tree and the knowledge it represents. While the biblical serpent becomes a tempter leading to a fall, the Sumerian serpent Ningish-Sidda is a guardian of the threshold itself, a master of the healing and cyclical truths that govern existence. This forces a radical reconsideration. Was the tree of knowledge not an invention, but a reinterpretation of a far older Mesopotamian symbol? The Ziusudra tree and its serpent lord suggest that the foundational stories of good and evil, life and death, may have been built upon an ancient framework where these concepts were not opposites, but intertwined parts of a single mysterious whole. These impossibly long reigns were never meant to be read as simple biography. The list is a theological document, a profound statement about the nature of time and authority in the primordial world. Before the Great Flood cleansed the earth, time itself was measured on a different, divine scale. A king ruling for 36,000 years was not a man who lived that long. His name likely represented an entire dynasty, a lineage of power consolidated under a single, symbolic title. This was a way of saying that the founding families of civilization possessed a stability and a divine mandate so absolute that their era felt eternal. Another theory suggests these numbers are not historical at all, but astronomical. The cycles of precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that takes 26,000 years to complete, might be encoded in these reigns. A king's rule of 10,000 years could symbolize his alignment with a specific celestial age, his authority mirrored in the patient turning of the heavens. But the most startling interpretation pushes even further. If these were not dynasties or star cycles, what were they? The king list meticulously separates these pre-flood rulers from the post-flood kings, whose reigns become progressively shorter and more human. This stark division implies a fundamental shift in the nature of rulership itself. The beings who ruled for tens of thousands of years may not have been human kings as we understand them. They could represent something else entirely, a different order of being with a different relationship to time, perhaps the Anunnaki themselves, overseeing the initial phases of human development across vast epochs. The steadily decreasing reigns after the flood tell their own secret story. It is a narrative of decline, a falling away from that golden, godlike age into our own mortal reality. As divine influence receded, or as the bloodlines diluted, human kingship became more fragile, more temporary. A reign of 1,000 years becomes a reign of 100, then 60, then 30. The list tracks our descent from a mythic past into the hard, factual light of history. This was not just a record of kings, it was a memory of lost time, a lament for a world that was once closer to the gods, and a cryptic chronicle that challenges our most basic assumptions about the past. This final secret brings us to the very source of Sumerian genius, the Apkallu. Sent by the god Enki before the Great Flood, these 7 sages were not mythical heroes. They were the ultimate teachers, the divine professors tasked with jump-starting human civilization. Their mission was to deliver the ME, the fundamental blueprints for society, directly to humanity. They taught mankind how to build cities and temples, the art of writing and mathematics, the laws of justice, and the secrets of agriculture and medicine. Without their guidance, the great Sumerian civilization, with its ziggurats and written codes, could never have emerged. Yet their physical description is where the mystery deepens beyond all previous secrets. The Apkallu were consistently depicted as strange, hybrid creatures, part human and part fish. They were often shown as men wearing the skin of a fish, with the fish's head forming a hood over their own. This was not a random artistic choice. It symbolized beings who were equally at home in 2 different worlds, the watery abyss of Enki's domain and the dry land of humanity. This bizarre imagery has sparked one of the most controversial debates in ancient history. Were the Apkallu merely symbolic, a metaphor for a sudden, divinely inspired leap in human knowledge? Or were they something more literal? The fish-like appearance is a persistent and specific detail. Could it be a primitive description of something entirely different, perhaps a suit or apparatus that allowed a non-human intelligence to exist in our atmosphere? The ancient texts describe them as coming from the Abzu, Enki's watery realm, which some interpret not as a mythical ocean but as a term for the cosmos itself. This has led to the radical theory that the seven sages were not mythological symbols but actual visitors, extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings who possessed advanced technology that was incomprehensible to early humans. Their fish-like form could have been an attempt to describe the appearance of a breathing apparatus or a flexible, scaled environmental suit. Their sevenfold number mirrors the seven wandering planets, suggesting a cosmic connection that goes beyond simple allegory. The mainstream academic view, of course, rejects this as pure speculation, insisting the Apkallu are powerful symbols of cultural transmission, representing the gradual, generational accumulation of knowledge that was later mythologized as a divine gift. They were the personification of inspiration itself, but the consistency of their depiction forces a difficult question. Why would a civilization so precise in its records choose such a specific and unnatural form to represent a simple abstract idea? The story of the Apkallu completes a cycle that began with the Anunnaki. If the Anunnaki were the princely overseers, then the Apkallu were their hands-on engineers, the technicians who implemented the grand design. They provided the forbidden knowledge, the tools that lifted humanity from a primitive state, but also, perhaps, made us a concern for the gods. Their legacy is our entire civilization, every city, every law, every written word. It forces us to confront the ultimate secret about our own origins. Did we invent civilization through our own ingenuity, or were we, as the oldest texts insist, taught by someone else? The fish-headed sages stand at the dawn of history, silent witnesses to a truth we are still trying to decipher. The legacy of these fish sages forces a confrontation with our deepest questions about history. Were the Apkallu a profound metaphor, or were they a distorted memory of actual, non-human teachers? This debate ignites when we compare their story to modern theories of ancient astronauts and lost civilizations. Proponents of these ideas point to the sheer, inexplicable leap of Sumerian civilization as potential evidence. How does a society go from simple farming villages to mastering astronomy, law, architecture, and writing in what seems like a historical blink of an eye? The sudden appearance of this complete cultural package, delivered by seven amphibious sages, feels to some like a technological transfer rather than a slow, organic evolution. The fish skin suit is reinterpreted not as a costume, but as a primitive description of an advanced environmental suit or breathing apparatus, worn by visitors who originated in a different atmosphere or even a different world, the Abzu. The seven sages themselves are then seen not as spirits, but as a team of specialists, a crew sent to terraform a planet and educate its native inhabitants. This perspective reframes the entire Sumerian pantheon. The Anunnaki become the administrators of a long-term project, and the Apkallu are the on-the-ground engineers who carried it out. Their eventual withdrawal before the Great Flood could symbolize the end of that direct, hands-on supervision, leaving humanity to manage and often mismanage the incredible tools we were given. The evidence cited is often circumstantial but persistent. Certain Sumerian artifacts and cylinder seals depict figures that are difficult to explain through conventional archaeology. Some show what look like beings with unusual headgear, holding objects that resemble modern tools or even electrical batteries. The precise astronomical knowledge, like the precession of the equinoxes, is presented as a data point that a primitive culture could not have calculated on its own. For those who follow this thread, the Apkallu are the missing link in human history, the literal answer to the question of how we advanced so far, so fast. Mainstream scholarship, however, offers a powerful and very different interpretation. Archaeologists and historians present a compelling case for the gradual development of Sumerian society. They point to the clear, stratified layers of ancient cities like Uruk and Eridu, which show a slow but steady progression from simple shrines to massive ziggurats over centuries. The invention of writing, they argue, did not appear fully formed. It evolved from practical accounting tokens and clay envelopes used to track livestock and grain, slowly developing into a complex script capable of recording poetry and lore. The Apkallu, in this view, are a brilliant cultural memory, a personification of this very real generational accumulation of knowledge. The 7 sages represent the 7 core disciplines that founded civilization: agriculture, masonry, law, writing, metalworking, weaving, and medicine. Their fish-like form is a symbolic link to the god Enki, whose domain was the fresh water, the absolute source of life in the arid Mesopotamian plain. They were the genius of the first inventors and thinkers, mythologized over time into semi-divine figures. The scholarly debate is not just about the past, it is about how we understand human potential. One side sees a history punctuated by miraculous intervention, while the other sees a testament to the incredible, innate ingenuity of humanity itself. Perhaps the most haunting possibility is that both sides contain a fragment of the truth. Maybe the Apkallu were the great innovators of their age, real men and women whose discoveries were so revolutionary they seemed to come from another world. Their legacy, whether symbolic or literal, is the world we live in today, a civilization built upon foundations so ancient we are still trying to read the instructions left by the teachers from the water. These fish-sage hybrids were not just described in texts, they were carved into the very walls of the palaces they were believed to protect. In countless stone reliefs and cylinder seals, the Apkallu stand as unmistakable figures, their human bodies clothed in the scaly skin of a fish, with the gaping fish head forming a hood over their own. But their most telling attributes are the objects they carry. In one hand they hold a small bucket, in the other a curious object that resembles a pine cone. These are not random items, they are the tools of a sacred technology. The bucket contains holy water from the Abzu, the primordial freshwater ocean of Enki. The pine cone is a sprinkler used to anoint and purify. Together, they form a ritual kit for cleansing and consecrating a space, for driving out malevolent spirits and infusing a structure with divine order. This imagery reveals a stunning reality. The knowledge of the Apkallu was not locked away in secret scrolls. It was operational, a living practice integrated into the most fundamental aspects of Sumerian life. Before the foundation of a temple was laid or a new king was crowned, these purification rites were performed. Priests, acting as the human representatives of the Apkallu, would mimic this exact ritual. They would carry their own buckets and pine cones, moving through the bare plot of land or the new royal chambers, flicking sacred water to establish a protective barrier against the chaos of the unseen world. They were spiritually programming the architecture, weaving a web of divine protection into the bricks and mortar. This practice was based on a powerful belief. A building was not an inert object, it was a living entity susceptible to spiritual infection just as a body is susceptible to disease. A palace built without this consecration was like a body without an immune system, vulnerable to the psychic parasites known as the Edimu or the destructive fury of a Gallu demon. The very stability of the state depended on this invisible maintenance. The king, as the link between heaven and earth, was a particularly attractive target for supernatural attack. His coronation and his regular rituals of renewal involved the most intense forms of this Apkallu magic. By being anointed with the sacred water, he was not just being blessed. He was being hardened against spiritual corrosion, his authority reinforced by the same primordial forces that had civilized humanity. So the next time you walk past an old building or see a leader inaugurated, think of the Sumerians. Their world was one where every foundation stone was laid with a whispered incantation, and where the greatest secrets of their civilization were held in the hands of fish-headed sages, forever frozen in stone, performing the ritual that held their world together.